Good afternoon, Denise. How are
Good
you?
afternoon. It's so good to be
Welcome.
here.
Thank you. Welcome
Thank
to
you.
Conquer Square Connection. You are a very important spiritual leader in our community, but you do so much more. How do you define yourself and describe the work that you do for us?
Well, I would see myself as a spiritual intersectionalist who heals and who wages for authentic human and cultural expression. It is a long journey synchronizing and simplifying how to think about the work we do in Congo Square with the Congo Square Preservation Society, and then as a community pastor with Peace Ministry. For me, all of those things are one. It's really about exploring our deep spiritual essence and how that informs what we do or don't do in the forms of our values, our beliefs, our principles that show up in our actions. And the goal is to invoke or evoke the spiritual awareness so that we can find the optimum way to be in relationship with ourselves and with each other. So in Congo Square, it's a very diverse community that comes there, tourists from all parts of the world who speak a multitude of language, but what their hope is that they can find something that will inspire them, that will ground them, and give them a sense of center. And so in Congo Square, as a spiritual leader, I have an opportunity to, through the act of a libation, is to ground that person in the moment, reminding them of the history of that location. It is not the only location that Africans and indigenous people gathered and did spiritual practices, but it is the place particular to New Orleans. It is a place particular to the vibration of that spiritual energy in the ground that we walk on, and the echoes of sounds in the park community, and that each of us brings some essence of that. So when people touch the tree, what they do is they're touching a piece of eternity. And I offer an opportunity for them to think about that ancestral connection to their now and the people who they represent, the people whose shoulders that they stand on, whether they realize that or not. It's pretty eclectic. Its intention is to bridge and to see people in their most authentic expression. So I would say spiritual intersectionalist who understands the significance of culture and identifying our uniqueness. It's really what I do. That plays out in community because I do everything else any other pastor would do. In Congo Square, if our drummers are not well, then we check on them. If they have a need, we make sure the needs are met. If there's someone in the community that needs some support, prayer time, resources, we figure out how to do that with them, what resources we can connect them to. And then I do the follow-up with them. How are you? Did this help you? What else do you need? And what we find is that people whose work schedules change, they say, I have to go to work, but I thought I'd come here first. And they'd get their hug or whatever they needed, and it would equip them to do whatever else they had to do in the course of the day. Or people will send us messages on our Facebook page, or they'll call and our folks will just start crying while they're there and talk about how their spirits were so touched in that moment. And we don't have a monopoly on it. It's just the moment that we're in and the significance of those ancient ones and the evidence of their existence that they left for us. So that's how I show up. We do weddings, we do christenings, we do transition stage ceremonies, from up to when people identify as woman, male, to people when they are uncoupling, to people who do couple. We do memorial remembrances as well. Life cycle ceremonies is what we do. And we try to acknowledge the uniqueness of the people that are there, and I think the thing we want to make sure they know is that they are seen.
You sound like a trailblazer because what you do is so unique, but also inclusive, but individualized as well. That there's
My
no
mom
pattern or
yeah.
template, it seems.
No, probably not. My mom says that I was always a very unusual child, that I knew things I didn't know why I knew them. And in my journeys in various seminaries, that's been part of the journey. I believe we have a calling in our lives. Like you have a calling to do what you do, to record life so that people understand that it was legitimate, it did exist, and you can never mistake that for something else. That's the ministry that I am called to live in. And no, there's no real template, but there are some principles and values that do inform that. I try to teach that in my spiritual leadership coaching class, that as a spiritual leader, we have a responsibility to be people of integrity, to be accountable, to be responsible, to spend time doing your spiritual hygiene practices so that you stay centered. And that when people see you, no matter where you are, they'll see the light of what is whole and good and enough in the witness of your behavior. Because people are watching whether we realize it or not.
Spiritual hygiene.
Yes.
I never heard that before. That's wonderful. I want to know if the history and the legacy of Congo Square influenced your work. Were you always at this place? And if you were not a member of the Congo Square Preservation Society, or if you did not come out there on Sundays the way you do, and you and Luther Gray actually are the ones, and Mama Jamila as well, who host this gathering every Sunday. If you did not have that, would you be where you are as a community pastor and doing all of the things that you do?
I'm certainly better and permissioned by being there. I'm certainly affirmed by being there. And I think I get more room for the gift of being there. And early in my life, there are things we saw and knew, and my mother was my first educator. So there are some things about being of the African diasporic and indigenous people culture that were always a part of the practice. My first shoes were moccasins, and my hard shoes were made in Mexico. So my first healers were root workers and medicine people. So that was always a part of my upbringing.
That's great. Thank you. You mentioned the diverse people who come to Congo Square on Sunday afternoons. They come from all walks of life, the tourists. So that made me think of the title of the website, Congo Square Connection. Can you speak to the connections that you've seen maybe out there on Sundays or in your travels across the country or abroad in parts of the African diaspora? Can you just
I'm so happy to do that. I travel to Ghana often, and when I'm in Ghana and the music is playing and the drum circles are happening and the funeral rituals occurring, I have to remind myself I'm not in New Orleans. There is a language difference, but from the waving of the handkerchief to the funeral colors, they're so similar to the beats you hear in your ear and the sauntering of the people who walk. It is so synchronistic, and I'm informed by that. When I was in the UK, there's a woman who came here to do some work around music, and she did a video, and I happened to be in Congo Square, and Otto started taping some of the things we're talking about right now, and she put it in her video. And when I went to the UK, then people knew about it because of the video that they saw. And so then I ended up with these new relationships in Wales and Scotland and Ireland, which shows evidence of that. And we had just had people from Japan tape a Sunday in Congo Square and air it in real time in Japan. Finland has a talk show, and they included Congo Square in one of their talk shows. And then the BBC came and did a special about the foliage and the spirituality in Congo Square. I would say that everywhere I've traveled, there is some connection to Congo Square in New Orleans in particular.
Awesome.
Kind of like the Native Americans, Chief Seattle said at one point that there is nowhere that we are not. And I just kind of feel like that. The ancestors are certainly very fluid in how we live our lives today.
Great. I know that you're also an author. Can you talk about your publications?
I am an author. I wrote a series of books called, the first one being Morning Thoughts Become Daily Things. And I wrote it because there is a way we can participate in the change that impacts the quality of our lives. And that there's a moment when we can make a decision to repattern our lives by practicing new habits. So the idea is to begin to permission yourself that things will change. And my go-to phrase is, every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. I don't know how the better is going to look, but I've just permissioned myself for something different to happen. So every day in every way, I am getting better and better. And with that, you get to put just one habit you want to change. Practice it for 21 days, and you will find that you have a new habit. If for any reason you break up that pattern, then you start over again. And time again, people report of the significance of that one small practice. It's not something that we would consider rocket science, but it is about redeveloping disciplines that are more appropriate for the life you're choosing to live. So Morning Thoughts Become Daily Things was actually seeded by my mom. Mildred Graves was now an ancestor. She would sing this song, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on Jesus, or we stayed on freedom for the freedom workers. The idea that you wake up with permissioning that something better is happening makes all the difference. Its companion is a journal, how we can begin to reword our lives. And since I believe in prayer and in the multitude of its expressions, I did a book called Life-Changing Prayers, which is a collection of prayers from around the world and around various traditions. Of course, it could be more comprehensive, but I gave what I had at the time, and perhaps will expand over time. So those are some of the writings that I have. The last one was tapping into your spiritual awareness. Not everybody will resonate with being religious. And other people have difficulty with spirituality, but the very idea that there's something greater than ourselves that exists, known by a multitude of names, offers each of us an opportunity to tap into it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for this interview. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Well, Freddi, I certainly want to thank you for your work and for you delineating the number of tribes that were in that space, because it gave me different languages. So I didn't have to treat enslaved Africans as a monolithic group, but it allowed me to do the research on what the Igbo brought to New Orleans and their ironwork, and what the coastal people brought to New Orleans in their rice harvesting. And so it was able to break the conversations and presentations down in a way where they were bite-sized and people could take one bite at a time. So I want to just thank you for that. And the work comes Sunday. So we would not be nearly as eloquent without the work that you've done, because you've given us tools as words and symbology that translates across the universe. So thank you. And the leadership of Mama Jamila and Baba Luther for their foresight to give it structure so that it remains a part of history.
Yes. You brought something to my mind, and that is how you coordinate the field trips for children, for students.
The Living Classroom.
Yes, Living Classroom field trip program. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the Living Classroom field trip program is a 90-minute experiential time where students come to Congo Square. They learn authentic dances, drumming techniques from authentic melodies and beats across the African diaspora. They also learn about the sculptures in Congo Square and the history of how what they're learning in history is directly related to things like the Louisiana Purchase, the incorporation of Congo Square, New Orleans as a city, the precious presence of the Homas and Chickasaw and Chala and Chapatula, and that there were great and mighty people just in that space. And it contextualizes things that could just be words out of a history book. People get to touch them and say, ah, aha. And here's why the second line is significant. Here's why people believe that Congo Square is the birthplace of jazz, because those 19 plus ethnic groups were finding ways to communicate across language differences and practices. So yes, it's a hands-on kinetic experience. I just recommend for everyone, not just for children. It's an enjoyable, and you certainly walk away knowing and being someone different.
We have workshops for adults as well, for tourists who come in, for groups. Yeah, so that I agree, for children as well as adults.